Welcome to Gideon's Promise, the podcast. In the landmark 1963 decision Gideon v. Wainwright, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled every person accused of a crime in America must be provided a lawyer, regardless of their ability to pay. This podcast is about the people that uphold that promise, public defenders. These dedicated lawyers give voice to 80% of the people thrown into the system, and yet in the national discussion regarding justice reform, public defenders are largely overlooked. This show centers public defenders in that conversation. We will explore the critical role public defenders play in addressing a wide range of issues facing marginalized communities with subject matter experts, key opinion leaders, and people impacted by the American criminal legal system. Listen as a community of advocates discuss their work to strengthen public defenders and transform public defense.
On November 11th, we celebrated Veterans Day, honoring those who have made the sacrifice to serve in our nation's armed forces. At Gideon's Promise, we are so grateful for the bravery and honor of our troops. We also recognize the devastating overlap between veterans' issues and mass incarceration. As of 2016, it is estimated that 107,000 veterans were serving time in state or federal prison. This is in large part due to the criminalization and inadequate treatment of mental health and substance use disorders. Distressingly, less than 50% of returning vets receive any mental health treatment that they may need. Here to discuss the intersection of veterans' issues and the criminal legal system, we are so excited to be joined by two dedicated public defenders, Nick Place and Michaela Himes.
Yeah, it's really great to have both of you with us. Let me tell the audience a little bit about Nick, and then Illy, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Michaela. Nick is both a veteran and he does work in Veterans Court in New Orleans, where he's been a staff attorney for over 3 years, representing hundreds of clients in one of the nation's most challenging jurisdictions. He was a graduate. He's a graduate of George Washington Law School, my alma mater. While there, he interned with the ACLU's National Security Project and the Federal Defender in Washington, D.C. He also clerked for a Missouri Supreme Court judge and is an alumnus of Gideon's Promise. After Nick graduated from undergraduate at Hofstra University, he was deployed to Afghanistan with the Marine Corps. And he cites his training and experience as a Marine officer as a key source of his leadership and interpersonal skills, which he now brings to public defense, thankfully. Of his motivation to become a public defender, and I love this quote. He says, quote, "After returning from Afghanistan and beginning law school, the protests following the police killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson radically opened my eyes to the oppression and injustice that is foundational to our criminal processing system." Nick, we're excited to talk to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And joining Nick is Michaela Himes. She is also an alum of Gideon's Promise and currently serves as the bond division chief at the Dallas County Public Defender Office. She manages attorneys, primarily handling bail review and mental health personal bond hearings and other aspects of adult criminal defense. Michaela specializes in cases involving mental health and intellectual disabilities. She received her undergraduate degree from the University of the Incarnate World Masters of Theological Studies from Vanderbilt. I did not know that, Michaela. From Vanderbilt University, and her JD from Southern Methodist University, also known as SMU, where she serves as the president of the Hispanic Law Students Association. Michaela, thank you so much for taking time to be with us here today. We are looking forward to this conversation, and I'm just going to roll right into my first question. We're here to talk about how the criminal legal system has dealt with the problems faced by veterans. In some places, including New Orleans and Dallas, they have established veterans courts. These courts can look different in many places. What are the how what does Veterans Court look like, Michaela, in your jurisdiction?
Well, first, if I could start by saying, I'd be remiss if I didn't start by saying, Nick, thank you so much for your service. I come from a family of military members, career military members, and I'm just so appreciative, and probably this is why, of all of our military service members, and am especially upset by the involvement of our military veterans in the criminal justice system and the treatment that they sometimes get. In Dallas County, we have a dedicated veterans court that is presided over by one of our felony district judges, and that is one of the many problem-solving courts that we have in Dallas County. We have a lot of problem-solving courts for substance use disorders, for mental health issues, for youthful offenders, for first-time involvement in the criminal justice system, and for veterans. And with this county veterans court system, people will qualify for the court pre-plea, meaning they'll come into the system before having to enter a guilty plea or accepting probation or any kind of sentence. It's not a condition of probation. It was meant to be a diversion from anything that would get them a conviction or place them on probation. So the idea is that they are evaluated for their needs, unique to them as a veteran, and are hooked up with services that will help them to stay out of the criminal justice system, get them connected with the services that they need and that they're entitled to as veterans, which can be different than the services that other people with substance use or mental health disorders have. Although the court does handle substance use disorder and mental health disorders, along with whatever other social service needs the veterans may have.
Nick, what about you? What in New Orleans? What do courts look like for veterans in New Orleans?
So we don't have in New Orleans any kind of like pre-plea option for Veterans Court. The district attorney's office runs a diversion program that is, for everyone that qualifies under the district attorney's criteria, which are nebulous, and it's really opaque as to what happens in there. As far as Veterans Court, it requires a guilty plea to get into. So it's almost always going to be a felony guilty plea. You're almost always going to go on felony probation, which means you're going to have a probation officer. And so in order to even get access to Veterans Court and to the services that it provides, you have to, plead guilty to a felony. And often it will be, your second or third felony, because there's not really a reason to both put yourself into a specialty court and onto the state's probation, if just the state's probation is available for a lot of people. So yeah, it would be really nice to have it as a pre-plea option. But even then, if your goal is to prevent people from having to interact with the criminal legal system, if your theory is we have the criminal legal system so people don't are scared of coming into contact or deterred from coming into contact with it, you would want to be providing these services up front. And that's, I think, especially true of veterans, but it's also true for everyone else that's involved in any specialty court. But the services actually provided, I think, are good, and everything that I've seen, it is there's a built-in community that comes from having people that have that shared experience. Even though you have Vietnam era veterans and Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and everything in between, there's just like that little common bond there that goes a long ways towards establishing like just a little bit of community with people who have that military experience and also unfortunately have this criminal punishment system experience as well.
So just for our listeners, just so I understand, so in Dallas, Michaela, veterans can get services in the early stages. They have not pled guilty, like Nick has said, in New Orleans, right? And so what's concerning to me is, Nick, is that you are pleading guilty to something, right? Whether you did it or not as a vet in New Orleans, in order to receive services. Am I correct in here, what I heard?
Yeah. So,
Oh, wow.
you
That's
know,
unbelievable to me.
yeah, it's not a great situation, and obviously, like, the VA is there, right? And my experiences with the VA have been fantastic here in New Orleans, but also, like, I have a place to live and I have a car, right? And so I can go down there and, you know, I can buy groceries, right? And so it's easier for me to go and access those services when I need them, than it is for, you know, a lot of people who are at risk of coming in contact with the police.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things is that, you know, a lot of our veterans, you know, we assume that they know that those services are available to them, but a lot of people just don't. And especially if they're at a point in their life where they're going through substance use or mental health issues, you know, they're not thinking about, you know, I know that these are all the places that I can go get assistance. And that's one of the benefits of our program is that although lots of courts in Dallas County handle substance use disorder and mental health issues, the Veterans Court has you know, a relationship, you know, a developed strong relationship with the VA. And so that connection to VA resources is, you know, it works like a well-oiled machine and to help people become aware of what services they're entitled to. And then also, like Nick said, to be going through that with people who have a similar background, if maybe they don't share the exact same experience, you know, they have some common experience and can share that.
So, you know, that you all really have kind of have brought us to the question I have, because we've seen these specialty courts, problem-solving courts, spring up in a lot of jurisdictions all across the country to deal with the kinds of problems that bring people into the criminal legal system, whether it's drug courts, mental health courts, domestic violence courts, and certainly veterans courts. And these courts often are the only way that people can get treatment. And one big critique of specialty courts, and it sounds like this critique is also valid, at least in some veterans courts, is that in order to get treatment, you have to be in the criminal legal system. And some people would say that forcing participation in treatment under the pain of going to prison is counterproductive. And so I just wonder if y'all could each touch on whether you think the fact that we are not treating this as a public health issue outside of the criminal legal system and instead dealing with it in the criminal legal system actually is undermining our ability to give vets the services that they need, whether they're dealing with substance abuse or mental health issues or problems in their relationships. Is this counterproductive? Michaela, you want to start?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that strikes me is that there are so many veterans out there that, because I meet them when they come into the criminal justice system, you know, that's where we are. But I'm looking at their the terms of their separation, for example, from the military. And, you know, they may be dishonorable, they may be honorable or general under other conditions. Or I'm sorry, is it honorable under general? I'm sorry, I'm getting my terminology a little confused. But the thing is that, you know, sometimes they assume, and things have changed, but sometimes they assume that a certain sort of separation disqualifies them from services. And it does disqualify them from some services, but things have changed a little bit about that. But I think that we do a horrible disservice to our military members when they are separated from service due to, for example, some substance use disorder or some behavioral issue that stems from traumatic brain injury or PTSD, and they're separate. They do not get an honorable discharge for whatever reason, and they don't know to fight that. They don't know to engage an attorney to help them fight the type of separation, and that affects the type of services that they get. And I just think that, you know, if we are finally at the point in our society where we're recognizing the importance of addressing mental health issues in our general population, then by golly, these people who have served our country and our veterans just have got to be entitled to at least the minimum level of mental health and substance use disorder treatment in order to help prevent them from coming into the criminal justice system, in order to, address those needs that they have. It's just I think it's a huge travesty that we're not addressing those issues up front, and that I'm glad the money is there for them once they become involved in the criminal justice system. I just wish that the money and the honor and the dignity were all there up front.
And Nick, it sounds like similar experience in New Orleans.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like, is Veterans Court a good option for, my office's like veteran clients? Like, yeah, in a lot of cases, absolutely. I have a client who recently, pled guilty to, in several cases, and will be, getting services from Veterans Court. And it sounds like, we'll give him a really good shot at being stable and like having a happy and productive life. But we could have done that. We could have done that years ago, right? If we had allocated our resources differently. And there's a lengthy prison sentence that's hanging over his head like a sword. And while, the guys that run our Veterans Court here are fantastic and really good about, their veterans themselves and bringing people in and being like, we are going to take care of you, as long as you take that step towards us here. It only comes after the guilty plea.
So Michaela, in treatment courts, a person is only eligible to participate if the crime that they are charged with is minor, is relatively minor. This leaves many people who need treatment without any way of getting help. Is this true in Veterans Court also?
Well, the criteria are different for different courts. And unfortunately, one of the disqualifiers in Veterans Court, with no exceptions, is that, or some of the disqualifiers rather, is that cases involving death or manufactured delivery of a controlled substance, sexual assault cases, those are just automatic exclusions. Other cases, are accepted at the discretion of the prosecutor. And so, yeah, I think it's some of the people who most need help are excluded.
And so even with the severity of the charge, and if it is clear that there may have been a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue that led to that alleged incident, they will ignore the need for services and they will charge that person as if they were someone without any challenges. Is that correct?
Yeah, without respect
Wow.
to respect to their issues related to their service, or their status as a veteran. Yeah, so it's left to us to bring that up in the normal context of a court proceeding, which, certainly we do and we try to address, but it leaves them without without this benefit of a possible expunction, which I should say we can address later is a partial expunction in Dallas County's case.
Wow. I'm just, and Nick, I'm assuming the same thing is happening in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's pretty much identical.
I'm learning a lot. I keep saying wow because I'm just, our men and women of service fight to protect this country, and we're not even giving them the services up front, which we talked about earlier. And it's just mind blowing to me.
It is mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need help, right? People
Yeah.
need help. We recognize that you need help. Oh, unless you're too scary.
Right.
Will, one thing, sorry, I've been thinking about the not having the services up front, and like I think people would be listening and be like, oh, well, what about the VA? And I'm sure people have heard like, oh, okay, well, the VA is a hassle and all that, which I mean can kind of be true, but VA hospitals, from my limited experience, are pretty good once you get into the system and know that they're there, right? But the challenge is knowing what they can offer and what they can do, and actually getting processed in, like, you have to go and do your initial intake wherever it is that you live, and then if you move, you have to go and do your intake there. And in the same way that lots of public services are available to people who aren't vets, there's this huge bureaucratic hurdle that is more difficult to get over if you don't have the baseline resources, the place to stay, the transportation, a steady job, et cetera, to go and access it. So weirdly, someone who probably needs those things less, like me, it's easier for me to get that stuff than for, whoever, is really in need. And also, when you're exiting the military, especially if you're a younger veteran, which most people don't stay 10, 20 years, most people do 4 like me and get out. You are a young person and you got other things on your mind and you're healthy then, or you're headed back home and you got to start working to take care of, your family or whatever. You're not worried about going and getting your VA benefits. And the exit process does not do a lot to hold your hand and connect you. And I don't know if I've shared this with Rat before, but I only am a lawyer because of the GI Bill, right? That's the only way I could go back to law school. When I was exiting, the Marine Corps told me I didn't have access to the GI Bill. Now, it was just somebody I'm sure made a mistake, right? But I went years, 2 or 3 years before I was in a VA hospital in Chicago, and some random social worker was like, "Oh, have you ever thought about using your GI Bill?" I told them "Oh, I don't have it." And they're like, "Oh, that doesn't sound right. Let me look this up." And they took 5 minutes, "Hey, you can go back to school for free." It took 5 minutes. I had no clue for years. And so that was going to replicate itself, for all these veterans who are out there. And there's lots of people who don't have access and aren't accessing resources that they could get to just because of that bureaucratic hurdle.
And I say, when I get an opportunity to present on this issue within the system, just on the criminal legal system as a whole, we need to take away these barriers for the people that our public defenders serve, right? If we are more proactive than reactive, we probably would all be out of a job, right? If we took care of our people. So I'm going to switch a little bit and also talk about proactive and reactive things in the criminal legal system as it relates to this topic. Michaela, as of 2018, there was an estimated 94,000 non-citizen military vets. At least 92 were deported between 2013 and 2018. 78% of deported veterans were removed because of the criminal convictions under the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. And our listeners had an opportunity to hear from Professor Violetta Chapin a few episodes back about the collateral consequences of being charged criminally and being deported. So they got a little bit of background. But have you witnessed veterans involved in the immigration system? And if so, what systemic changes could better protect them from deportation?
Yeah, well, right from the very beginning, changes that could help them would be, access to drug treatment resources right up front, acknowledgement of the effects of traumatic brain injuries, acknowledgement of, the effects of Gulf War syndrome, the effects of the burn pits.
Yeah, the burn pits.
Yeah.
What are the burn pits?
Nick, do you want to explain that?
So at various points in various deployment, there was a lot of there were toxic burn pits where the DoD disposed of various materials and chemicals, and lots of people they got carcinogens or whatever in their lungs, and it's causing a whole bunch of health problems as those vets get older. It's bad stuff.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I understand, and our listeners. Go ahead, Michaela. I'm sorry. Finish your.
Yeah, it's like Agent Orange. It can create problems. Genetic mutations that people don't necessarily recognize right away, and then affect children of these veterans. And the government puts a time limit on it. Saying, okay, well, we're going to acknowledge the effects of burn pits, that the harmful effects of burn pits, but only if you come forward with a claim during this period of time, which it doesn't necessarily work for, like Nick said, a young person separating from service. But anyway, the point is that if we address that, if we acknowledge that stuff up front, we had changes to that stuff up front, we got people the resources they needed right up front, instead of separating people who have had brushes with the law because of substance use disorder or mental health disorder. If we treated them, if we had legislation to protect, and then the other thing further down, if we had legislation to protect veterans who served our country, is just, I think, the simplest, the most obvious answer is that we need legislation that protects people who serve our country. So, I've dealt with so many clients here who are not US citizens, who face deportation, who face negative immigration consequences. And some of the most painful to deal with are our veterans, who we know have put years into service of this country, have literally put their lives on the line. And then when they get involved in the criminal justice system, one that I'm thinking of, drug use, substance use disorder, that, in our conversations was directly related to self-medication from, self-medication because of his experiences, during wartime service, led to drug cases, led to theft cases. And he was looking at, here's a child served his country for years and looking at deportation. Happily, we have an immigration attorney on staff, through my involvement with Gideon's Promise and Violetta, who you mentioned, is where I became aware of the real need to address immigration issues in a different way. And we were able to get a fabulous immigration attorney on staff who evaluates every single one of our clients who has every single one of our non-US citizen clients, and to talk to us about the consequences of their cases, their criminal cases on their immigration status. And although we generally keep that information here, we don't go represent people in immigration court. This attorney was able to represent that particular client in immigration court and keep him from being deported. She was able to tell the story of his service to our country. And for some reason, I don't think immigration judges are generally, I haven't really heard a lot of stories of them being swayed by people's, real personal experiences, but we got lucky, and Jordan was a fantastic storyteller and told this young man's story and was able to prevent him being deported.
That's great.
That is really such a powerful story. And Michaela, I don't think you got lucky. I really do think, right, this is an example of how, when we have supported, well-resourced, compassionate public defenders who are able to identify these issues and address these issues, it makes a difference. One thing we are constantly saying on this podcast is that our failure to support public defenders is one of the greatest shortcomings of our broader fight for criminal justice reform in America. And I appreciate both of you, because I think you're illustrating that. I got to say, Michaela, it's heartbreaking to me to hear this story that we can send people overseas to potentially to risk their life to protect us, and then when they come back home and they have challenges, right, that get them into legal trouble, we can deport them and not even sort of claim them as our own. That is truly heartbreaking. But even for folks who are citizens, and Nick, I want to ask you about this, because for folks who are citizens, they also aren't always treated so well. We know that veterans face a higher risk of homelessness than the general population. There are 62,000 veterans currently right now sleeping on the street, and 1.4 million veterans at risk of homelessness. And Nick, I was thinking about a conversation you and I had last week, and you were talking about how when you went into the Marines, you went in with a support system, but that you were in service side by side with so many people that didn't have a support system and came out of the Marines and came out of the military without a support system. And so it seems like there's an added obligation, given the number of people that come into the military without support, to make sure they get it when they come out. I just want to ask you, it's known that poverty and homelessness are key components to the prison pipeline. veterans experience poverty and homelessness at high rates. How can we intervene? Where do we go?
So, I think we need to be, first off, like, honest about who goes into the military, right? The U.S. military, for at least the entire time I've been alive, has made a conscious choice to target for recruitment people in lower economic classes, without, means to advance or take care of their families, without access to education, and provide, like, hey, here is a way out for your service in the military, right? And at the end of that service, those people frequently leave this kind of like false, like artificially created kind of warrior caste and go back into whatever caste it was that they were from before. Sometimes they are better off. Sometimes they know they have access to the services that they've earned, for lack of a better term, but they're going back to the caste from which they were recruited by the state, right? And they're going back with often a host of new problems. And I think there is a little bit of a stereotype among civilians that, like, everyone who's getting out of the military has PTSD from combat, and that's not true, right? But lots do, and almost everyone has had some kind of experience that has fundamentally, like, changed who they are. And maybe now they're married, maybe they have different job skills, maybe they've got, they hurt their back or something like that, like all these different things, and now they're re-entering this world. And so it's, you lower the bureaucratic hurdles to get access to the services that we say they've earned, but also all the stuff that we do for veterans, or a claim that we do for veterans, you could do that for everybody, because the problems you just described for veterans also apply to a whole bunch of civilians that are going to come into contact with the criminal legal system. And so I think it's, like, worth asking, and I think public defenders do this all the time, but the average people may not, is like, what do we have courts for? What do we have jails for? Like, just accepting those things on their stated logic. You have the, proponents of the current legal system and of prisons and all this crap are gonna be like, oh, well, we need that to prevent people from committing, crimes or whatever. And you look at the entire time, the 34 years I've been alive, that strategy has obviously failed, right? Like,
It's failed miserably. Nick.
Yeah,
it's failed miserably.
So if that's your stated goal, this isn't working. So maybe we could try something different, right? And so if we reallocated our resources to making sure people had homes and had access to healthcare and had money to pay for frickin' food, and what to provide for people's needs, and we need to do that for veterans. But for veterans, there's this conversation like, oh, well, these people maybe deserve it more. And it's like, first off, no, I reject categorically the notion that veterans are inherently different or more deserving than the average person. But even when you accept that, if the goal of all this is to prevent crimes from occurring, how they are currently defined, you just use those resources that you're using for caging for helping people up front, and you're going to be way better off, and you're going to have better outcomes, and you're actually going to prevent so many of the crimes that carceralists are, supposedly there to prevent. And sorry, I flew off the handle a little bit about that.
No, but you go for it. I mean, as a vet, you saying it carries much more weight than Rap and I saying it, and even Michaela saying it. So thank you for that, Nick. So I have a question, because Nick was talking about being attacking this. Everyone deserves the treatment and the support. And it's not just, and I appreciate Nick you saying not every veteran comes out with mental health challenges and substance abuse. We don't want to cast a wide net over a group of people, but you talked about the changing the mindset and heart set of people, which it's culture change, right? Gideon's Promise, this organization was founded, right? We deal with culture change in public defense. So we understand the power of changing hearts and minds. And what you're talking about, Nick and Michaela, I would love for you to address this question, is how do we have a large systemic change across the system. How should the military change its culture? Should the military change its culture? I know this is a hard question, right? And I hope people don't get upset with me, but should the military change its culture if it's producing people that need support? So, and how could this culture change improve the lives of veterans?
But before Michaela answers, I just want to say for folks who aren't in the studio with us, Nick got a big chuckle out of that question.
It's like I was like, oh man, there's a lot I'm going to say here and could get myself in trouble.
Well, I'm gonna so don't get yourself in trouble, Nick. Let's ride the wave of what Michaela's saying, because I don't want you to get in trouble.
I'm gonna get a call from the Department of Defense.
No. But Michaela, how could culture change in the military help improve the lives of veterans? What are your thoughts on that?
I honestly don't know. I hope Nick has a better answer for this, honestly, than I do. I was just talking to my brother about this last night. My brother's recently retired, after a lifetime career in the service. And he, he is of the opinion that the military does a really good job explaining to people about, hey, you may see this and you may experience PTSD as a result, or you may do this and you're going to see some things that are going to change you. And, I get it. I get what he's saying, but I think there's a real difference between saying the words and offering the treatment. I think we've still got a culture in the military where they may say those words and let you know that you may experience something. And Nick, please correct me if I'm wrong. But when you maybe speak up while you're in service and say that you're experiencing things, you may be talking yourself into a separation, And so I think that that's something that needs to really be considered and changed. I honestly don't know beyond that.
What about you, Nick? I'm sure you have a laundry list today.
Yeah.
Just to cover a couple of things about, could the culture change in the military really improve the lives of veterans?
So I think what Michaela said as regards to, having mental health struggles while you're in the military is definitely true. But I think it extends to personal life struggles of just about any kind. You will have in the military lots of personal life struggles because you are handing a bunch of 18 to 23-year-old kids their first steady paycheck, and they're a long ways away from where they live. And I'm not talking about being deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq. I'm talking okay, now you live in on Camp Pendleton and you're from freaking Missouri like I am. And you're going to have life changes and new life stresses even outside of deployment. And it's a very personnel dependent environment. Some leaders, and when I say leaders, I'm talking about 23, 24, 25-year-olds to these 18-year-olds are going to provide good guidance and a sense of community and help them through those struggles. And then some won't, and the bureaucracy is going to eat some up, right? I think as far as a cultural change, there's really kind of two militaries in a way. There is the bureaucratic business-like superstructure of career military officers and staff non-commissioned officers who are going to be there for 15, 20 plus years, that kind of set what the stated culture is and make all the PowerPoints and all the ads and all this crap. And then you have the people who are there for 4, maybe 8 years, the junior officers and all your non-commissioned officers and your E1s through E3s who are really running the whole thing. And they're the ones who are getting out before 20 years old and not making a career out of it. And those people don't have as much of a voice in what their experience is. And on one hand, that's just the nature of what a rigid command structure is and how the organization's just going to run. But as far as like access to services and letting people know what's available when you get out, like, yeah, you get a week long, PowerPoint that you're not paying any attention to on your way out. Cause you're like, oh yeah, I'm out of the military, man. I am done. I'm letting my hair grow out and I'm not shaving anymore. And like, you need some kind of engagement, like after that, that's not just like, hey, I hope you go to the VA and ask about what services you need before you really need them. And some kind of like transitional program there, or preparation for life outside of the military, as opposed to trying to separate your career Marines, soldiers, airmen, whatever, from the chaff who are just there to do their one contract and get out or whatever. That can make a world of difference in outcomes for people who get separated, right? And also, like, and part of that transitional program, sorry, this just popped into my head, asking people what they're going back to. Like, what are you leaving to, right? What do you need on your way out? Like, nobody ever asks that. They give you like the, hey, here's what's available, and never like, hey man, like, what do you need? Where are you going? Do you have a job lined up, et cetera, et cetera? And that's all. Like, maybe you've got a staff NCO who cares about you, and ask those questions and, make sure to point you in the right direction. Maybe you don't, and you just kind of fall by the wayside,
Yeah. And Nick, so I have a question about, you mentioned, right, it's not just mental health, sometimes it's joblessness. You mentioned someone hurt their back and maybe they were an hourly employee and kept taking off and was terminated, right? Food insecurity, especially what's happening in this last 18, 19 months with the COVID-19 pandemic, people, not having enough to eat and doing things that are illegal, right? In many places. Can you share a story about someone you met through Veterans Court that can help our audience appreciate why a more compassionate approach towards dealing with the challenges faced by veterans is so important? And Nick, I asked you to share a story, and also you, Michaela, if you would do that.
So, I don't meet clients like in Veterans Court. I meet them when they first get arrested, right?
Okay.
And Veterans Court is a very small part of my practice, but it's an option that's open to clients who I know are veterans. I kind of work with other public defenders in my office who have Veterans Court to see, what's available to them. And I had a client who was a veteran and had severe, mental health issues. And when my guy is medicated, he's fine. Like, he's good. And when he's not, he's it's tough for him. And the judge that he has landed in front of, their approach is, if you have a felony, you get time. You come back in front of the system, you're getting more time, which doesn't really make sense when you think about it, right? Because if the concept is prison time is going to deter you, is going to fix this problem, and it didn't the first time, then how is more time necessarily going to fix it? It's like, but whatever. That was their logic. Veterans Court became a way to say, like, hey, here's something different. Here's something we can do for this person that will provide them with what they need and have not been receiving. A place to live, a way to get their medicine, somebody out there who gives a damn about them, right? A little bit of community, someone you're going to come see who's not a judge or a probation officer who's wearing his probation polo and has a freaking pistol on his hip and is there to put you back in jail if he gets the chance. A community of other veterans from a large span of time who are now invested in making sure you don't have to go back to jail, right? And so that is that going to work out for him long term? I hope so. I think it probably will, and sometimes it doesn't, though, right? But the prison time certainly isn't going to do anything. It costs more and it's torture. So why don't we try this other thing? And so far, dude's doing great. So
That's great to hear, Nick. What about you, Michaela?
So there's a face that comes to mind, a guy that I visited in the jail, and this is when I was filling in for one of our bond attorneys who they don't handle a case to completion. They do kind of an initial client interview, and they pass that information along to the attorney who's going to handle the case going forward. And so I've tried to impress upon my attorneys that even though, hey, we're just doing that one interview and we're going to do a small hearing, we're going to do a bond hearing. Like that's really the first time to make contact with a client, to make connection with a client, to let them know that there's somebody there who cares and you're not just going through the motions. And so I remember I had to go over to the jail to see him and we don't always, we have video systems now where we can do video calls and whatnot. This guy, they wouldn't bring him to a video booth. They said he was too combative. He was not responsive. So I had to go over to the jail and see him. And he came shuffling in, head down, super quiet. I thought he wasn't going to talk to me. I thought he wasn't going to answer any of my questions. And, I generally ask all my clients about their military service. And, we got to that point of the interview where I asked him about his military service and he kind of mumbled something. And, because he wasn't being very responsive, I might have just kind of moved past it. But I thought, well, let me stop and ask him. And when they give me a little more details, sometimes I do try and ask him about specifics, see if they want to talk about it. And this guy, I can tell you, I don't even remember what charge he was in on. I know he didn't have a home, and I know it was going to be we were going to have a hard time getting him a bond because he did a free bond because he did not have a home address. But he actually opened up and started talking to me about his military service. And this guy didn't just have a Ranger cab. He didn't go through the training. He was actually in a Ranger battalion, and he actually did the work. And I think he'd been in for like 9 years or something before he got a bad separation because of substance use problems. And this guy had come from a real small, we talked more and more after that, after I expressed after I expressed some empathy for what happened to him, and he didn't get treatment when the problem came up while he was serving. He didn't get treatment. He got discharged. And he had come from a real small town, and his whole identity was wrapped up in his military service and this career that he had built for himself. And then when he got a bad discharge, he couldn't even come back. And you could tell he just felt really ashamed. And like he didn't generally like to talk about it. Couldn't use that as a booster to go on and do something else. And he just, once he got discharged, he just spiraled out of control. He didn't seek help on the outside. He didn't feel employable, even though he had a lot of great stuff going for him. And he just spiraled into homelessness and more drug use. And, the thing is that that's maybe a guy who could get his discharge relooked at, And so we talked about that. We talked about, pursuing the services that were available to him, should be available to him as a veteran, getting him hooked up with an advocate who can help him get looked at his level of discharge. I was able to get him a bond and get him some temporary housing so that he could get this bond. And I tell you, this is sometimes our interviews, I'll be honest with you, we're public defenders who handle a lot of cases. Sometimes these pre-bond hearing interviews, they take 10 minutes, they take 15 minutes. I must have sat with this guy for like an hour and a half over at the jail, late one evening. And I knew he needed somebody to listen to him. And, it doesn't always have to be somebody involved in the criminal justice system. Like people on the outside need to listen and care and realize that people have worth.
So let me just say we are running out of time, but I am just so grateful that the two of you would spend this time with us. It always inspires me to talk to those of you doing this critical work on the front lines of this fight for justice. And as we wrap up, I wonder if we are short on time, if you could each maybe take a minute and just leave our listeners with one piece of information, one sentiment. If there's one thing you could share with the audience before we call it a day, what would it be? Nick, let's start with you.
I would just, I think, ask people to look at, the way that we kind of deify veterans in popular culture and on television and at sporting events and all this stuff. And then look at our actual treatment of veterans and how we use veterans when they're actually troops, right? When they're Marines and sailors, like what are we using them for? How are we spending our lives and money? And what is that accomplishing? And I think, in the conflict that I was part of, not much, it looks like, right? And that those resources, that time, that energy, that effort, that money, you could bring that back and use it here to provide for the needs of those veterans and also all the other people who are coming into contact with the criminal legal system. And prevent them from ever having to interact with this horrible system that we unfortunately are still working in, and create just a much better, safer, and free society. And so I know we talk about like freedom when we have jet flyers and flyovers and all that crap, but man, you took some of that money and used it for housing and these services that we're talking about and groceries and all that stuff. For people before they come into contact with the criminal punishment system, you would find that we live in a much safer and freer society, I think.
Oh, that's great, Nick. Thank you. Michaela, how about you?
Well, I think that, as a society, we other people all the time. We like to other people. We've got our society, we've got our communities, and then we've got those other people that are in jail. And those are not the same people that are out in our community. And the fact is that people who are incarcerated are part of our community. They're going to be they came from our community. They're going to come back into our community, and they shouldn't be kind of ripped out of our community during the time that they're in jail. We need to wrap around them. We need to recognize that they need to be supported. They need help and assistance. And I think that where I'm going with this is that, people in our military are also not apart from our community. They are the members of our community. They experience the same troubles that people in our community experience. So when we ignore the problems that they have, because people in the military are supposed to be strong soldiers who are capable of just doing a job and don't have any of the mental health or substance use disorders that people walking around in our community all day long have. I think we do a horrible disservice to them. We put unrealistic expectations on them. And my hope is that we would change that, and we would recognize that issues need to be addressed while people are in service. And we need to recognize that just like people in jail are a part of our communities, people in the military service are a part of our communities, and we are all the same, dealing with the same issues to some extent.
Well, Michaela Hines from the Dallas County Public Defender Office in Dallas, Texas, and Nick Place from the Orleans Public Defender in New Orleans, Louisiana. I want to say thank you so much for joining us on Gideon's Promise, the podcast. I am Ilham Askia.
And I am Jonathan Wrapping
it up.
Hey, Il, before we hit that outro, why don't you tell people how to order a copy of the book in your radio voice?
In my radio voice?
Yeah, in your radio voice.
Okay. Get your copy of Gideon's Promise, a public defender movement to transform criminal justice at Amazon, IndieBound, Beacon Press, or wherever books are sold. Pre-order today, and a portion of proceeds will help us support public defenders.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Thank you for listening to Gideon's Promise, the podcast. For more information on the topics covered and featured guests, please visit our website at gideonspromise.org. And finally, please subscribe, share, and let us know what you think.